Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Here are today's top stories. The US seizes 2 Shadow Fleet tankers linked to Venezuelan oil. US immigration agents fatally shoot a woman, sparking anger across the country. And widespread protests in Iran continue for the 11th day. First this morning, the US has seized 2 Venezuela-linked vessels, including a Russian-flagged tanker in the North Atlantic and the Caribbean. The UK Air Force said it provided intelligence and air support in tracking and intercepting the ships. Moscow has condemned the seizure of its tanker and demanded that Russians on board are sent back home.
The United States says it seized 2 vessels linked to Venezuela on Wednesday in coordinated operations in the Atlantic and Caribbean. US European Command said it took control of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic. The ship, now named Marinera and formerly the Bella One, was seized under a US federal court warrant for alleged sanctions violations. Shortly afterwards, US Southern Command reported the interception of a second vessel in the Caribbean, described as stateless and suspected of illicit activity. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said both ships were last docked in or bound for Venezuela, and the operations involved close coordination with the US Coast Guard. The United Kingdom confirmed it provided surveillance and logistical support to the Atlantic operation at Washington's request.
The US's enforcement action was based upon counter-Iran sanctions aimed at stopping Iran from fueling instability through the profits of illegal oil sales. The UK supported this action to achieve 3 objectives. First, to enforce counter-Iran sanctions. Second, to tackle the global security threat posed by expanding shadowy maritime activity. And third, to reinforce British homeland defence and security in this era of rising threats.
Analysts say the Marinera's boarding underscores rising tensions over sanctions and opaque tanker networks.
The Shadow Fleet and the boarding of the Marinera tanker, previously known Bella One, after it obtained the Russian flag, is a telling example. Certainly a move bound to raise tensions with Russia and risks escalation. But the Trump administration likely found that stepping back would show weakness, and hence whether actions against Russia-flagged or even Chinese-flagged vessels will continue is to be seen, but remain secondary to the priority of enforcement of sanctions on Venezuela.
Russia's transport ministry condemned the seizure, calling it a violation of international law. In Caracas, Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said on Wednesday about 100 people were killed in the US attack that ousted President Nicolas Maduro, marking the first official death toll.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says there should be no extra demands placed on Ukraine in the latest round of peace talks. He made the comment during a speech in Cyprus during a ceremony that marked the European Union's rotating presidency on Wednesday. He called on Kyiv's allies to step up their pressure on Russia through sanctions.
We need a practical mechanism that will allow these funds to truly help Ukraine. This mechanism must be designed not to create problems, of course, but to reduce the challenges we already face. And we are doing everything required on our side in the negotiation process. And we expect that no additional or excessive demands will be placed on Ukraine.
Staying on the war in Ukraine, one person has been killed after attacks on 2 seaports in the Odessa region on Wednesday, injuring 8 others. Local authorities say the ports are key export arteries for Ukraine's commodity-heavy economy and remain operational. Meanwhile, Ukraine's energy ministry says that Russian strikes have almost completely cut power supplies in 2 southeastern regions. Hospitals and other critical facilities are now running on backup generators. European leaders have reiterated that Greenland is not for sale. The comments come after renewed interest from US President Donald Trump in acquiring the island. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe as alarmed allies walk a tightrope, attempting to protect Greenland while trying not to antagonize U.S. President Trump's goal to annex the Danish autonomous territory. They reiterate that the mineral-rich Arctic island is not for sale, and EU Council President Antonio Costa says any attempt to claim it would be contrary to international law and alliance principles. Last night, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he would meet with the leaders of Denmark next week, but signaled no retreat from Trump's aim to take over the island. He said if any U.S. president identified any threat to the national security of his country, they retained the option to address it through military means. But he also said he prioritized diplomatic resolutions. Speaking at Wednesday's news briefing, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that the U.S. is actively discussing the purchase of Greenland and that Trump's first option has always been diplomacy. She pointed out that the idea to acquire Greenland predates the Trump administration going back to the 1800s. Earlier in the day, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot said he spoke to Rubio, who, quote, discarded the idea that what just happened in Venezuela could happen in Greenland. Barrot was heading to a meeting with his German and Polish counterparts to discuss this issue and said they want to take action but, quote, want to do so together with our European partners. However, according to Reuters, a senior European official said Denmark must lead efforts to coordinate a response and that it has not yet told its European allies what kind of concrete support Denmark and Greenland need. This week, Denmark's Prime Minister said Greenland should not fear an imminent American takeover and that they wanted to boost ties with the U.S. He also warned, however, that any attack by the U.S. would spell the end of NATO. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
A woman has been fatally shot by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent in Minneapolis on Wednesday. The action has sparked widespread political backlash. ICE has defended the incident as an act of self-defense.
A U.S. woman fatally shot by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent in Minneapolis on Wednesday has been identified as Renee Nicole Good. Federal sources confirm that Good was a legal observer of federal actions in the city and was not a target of the ICE operation. The shooting happened at East 34th Street and Portland Avenue, where federal and local law enforcement clashed with protesters. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security says the officers' actions were in self-defense.
It was an act of domestic terrorism. What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him.
President Donald Trump also said the same in a social media post, saying that the officer seems to have shot her in self-defense. However, Minnesota's politicians blame the Trump administration's immigration tactics. Governor Tim Walz condemned the shooting, citing the surge in ICE activity in the region.
We've been warning for weeks that the Trump administration's dangerous, sensationalized operations are a threat to our public safety, that someone was going to get hurt. What we're seeing is the consequences of governance designed to generate fear, headlines, and conflict. It's governing by reality TV. And today that recklessness cost someone their life.
Reports indicate that the Trump administration had planned to send around 2,000 ICE agents to Minneapolis.
There were dozens, if not hundreds, of ICE and federal officers that were there at the time. Having them there was only causing more chaos. Having them there was only making a difficult situation even more problematic, and one that, yes, they created themselves.
The shooting also happened just a few blocks away from where a Minneapolis officer murdered George Floyd in 2020, sparking off weeks of protests around the US and worldwide. The FBI and Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension are now investigating the incident.
US President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will no longer be a part of the 66 international and United Nations related organizations. He cites conflicts with the country's national interests. The White House says the move ends US participation and funding for entities that it says promote globalist agendas or operate inefficiently. Analysts warn the withdrawal could reduce America's influence on global issues such as climate change, gender inequality, and international health. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has agreed to meet US President Donald Trump at the White House following the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The two leaders say they've had a phone call to ease tensions in the region. It comes after crowds gathered at the Colombia-Venezuela border on Wednesday to protest against Trump's comments that the country could also face US action.
Peace is found through dialogue, and that's why I accept President Trump's proposal to talk. We'll see what comes of it. I'll keep insisting that an alliance is possible in clean energy because it brings peace and life and love. Colombia knows how to take advantage of peace.
At least 2 Palestinians were killed and several others wounded in an Israeli airstrike on Gaza City on Wednesday, according to local health officials. The Israeli military says the attack targeted a senior Hamas militant after its troops came under fire earlier in the day. Separately, an Israeli-backed Palestinian militia reported killing 2 Hamas members in Rafah. There was no immediate comment from Hamas. Since a US-brokered ceasefire in October, Gaza health officials report more than 400 Palestinians and 3 Israeli soldiers have been killed. Hundreds of citizens are fleeing their homes in the city of Aleppo after clashes broke out between Syrian government and Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Fierce fighting resumed in the city for a second day on Wednesday, displacing thousands of civilians. Some took shelter at a mosque after 6 people were killed on Tuesday. The government say it's opened humanitarian corridors for families to flee unsafe neighborhoods, leading them out in city buses. A source from the government's Civil Defense Rescue Force say an estimated 10,000 people had already left. You're watching A News with me, Nadia Jani. Now we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Nationwide anti-government protests in Iran entered an 11th day on Wednesday. Local media report that 2 officers were killed, bringing the death toll to at least 38. Here's more on that story.
Unrest has continued across Iran for an 11th day, with violent clashes breaking out between anti-government protesters and security forces in several locations on Wednesday. The demonstrations began in late December last year, sparked by anger over the country's worsening economic situation. They've now spread to 111 cities and towns across all 31 provinces. Local media report that 2 police officers were killed by armed individuals in the southwestern town of Lordegan, bringing the death toll from the unrest to at least 38. More than 2,000 arrests have also been reported. Meanwhile, the exiled son of Iran's toppled Shah, Reza Pahlavi, has urged security forces to side with the people. Pahlavi, who has lived in exile for more than 4 decades, is also calling for further protests, although it remains unclear how much support he commands on the ground, despite some pro-Pahlavi slogans heard during demonstrations.
This is a direct message addressed to Iran's armed and security forces, you who wear a military uniform to defend the Iranian nation and who are now facing a historic choice. At a time when the brave and united people of Iran are building and writing history, my question to you is this: on which side of history will you stand? Alongside the criminals or alongside the people?
Pahlavi's remarks come as Iranian officials condemn a threat by US President Donald Trump of possible intervention and warn against participation in the nationwide protests, saying those involved would be treated as enemies of the state.
Those who come into the streets today to take part in riots, or lead them, or support them, or assist them, in light of this explicit declaration of position by the criminal Zionist regime, and likewise by the criminal President of the United States, and the issues they raised, that if anyone comes into the streets for riots, or to create insecurity, or supports them, then no excuse remains for them. The matter has become very clear and transparent. They are now operating in line with the enemies of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Iran's currency, the rial, has fallen to a record low, while inflation has climbed to 40%. The economy has been battered by years of US sanctions, with the rial in free fall since last year's Israeli-US strikes, which mainly targeted nuclear sites where the West says Tehran has been working on nuclear weapons, a claim Iran denies.
Staying on Iran, it has issued a sharp warning over what it calls growing hostile signals from the US. Tehran says it may act before any attack takes place as tensions rise alongside ongoing domestic protests over the economy. Tirash Ralilu has more from Tehran.
Iran's Defense Council warned in a statement on Tuesday of a preemptive action if it detects a hostile threat beyond rhetoric, saying that Tehran's response to a forthcoming threat will be significant. It stressed that Iran does not see itself confined solely to reaction after an act has occurred and views objective indicators of threat as part of the security equation. The statement by the Secretariat of the newly formed Defense Council, which was established in the wake of the 12-day US-Israel war against Iran last June, was issued as Washington and Tel Aviv have recently drummed up their hostile rhetoric against Tehran. The strongly worded statement promising precautionary action if threats directed at Iran go beyond rhetoric raised the possibility of a preemptive measure by Tehran in anticipation of an approaching military attack. It stressed that escalation of threatening and interventionist rhetoric, which goes beyond verbal stance, can be understood as hostile behavior, a path that, if continued, will result in a proportionate and decisive response. The Defense Council's statement was issued as Iran is passing through the 11th day of protest to rising inflation. Earlier, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei said that protesters to economic woes and violent rioters will not be dealt similarly. Turash Shirarilu, Tehran, A News.
Now, a major step in Azerbaijan's renewable energy strategy is taking place today. The official inauguration of the Khuzar Absharon 248 megawatt wind power plant marks a key milestone in the country's green energy development. Fikrat Dolokhanov reports from the ground.
First official event at Gülistan Palace of 2026 is set to focus on Azerbaijan's green energy ambitions. Very shortly, the country will formally launch the Khiza Absheron wind power plant, the largest wind energy project ever implemented in Azerbaijan. The event will take place here at Gülistan Palace with the participation of the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the representatives of Saudi Arabia's Aqua Power, led by the chairman of the board of directors, Mohammad Abdullah Abunayyan. The wind power plant has a total installed capacity of 240 megawatts and is expected to become fully operational this year. Once online, it will generate close to 1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity annually, making a significant contribution to the national grid. According to official estimates, the project will allow Azerbaijan to save around 220 million cubic meters of natural gas each year, reduce carbon emissions by more than 400,000 tons, and supply electricity to approximately 300,000 households. The plan is being developed across areas in Khiza and Absheron, with turbine installation starting in Absheron, where the first 8 units have already been planned. The total investment exceeds $300 million and is fully financed through foreign investment. Importantly, this is Aqua Power's first renewable energy project in Azerbaijan, underlining the country's growing role as a regional hub for clean and diversified energy.
This week, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev spoke to local news channels on a number of topics and issues facing the country and the global community. Aliyev highlighted the direction and scope of Azerbaijan's expanding partnership with China, pointing to its growing strategic importance. Here's a snippet of the interview.
Azerbaijan and China have positioned themselves within a changing global landscape by deepening cooperation across multiple sectors. According to President Ilham Aliyev, the framework agreed during his state visit to China last year reflects more than economic engagement. With growing trade volumes and expanding investment links, it signals political trust with one of the world's leading powers and places Azerbaijan within a higher tier of long-term strategic partnership.
We had adopted a joint statement on strategic partnership. Over the course of 1 year resulted in 2 documents on strategic and then comprehensive strategic partnership being adopted and signed, giving a significant boost to the development of bilateral economic ties. We are observing growth in turnover. It has reached a record high of $4 billion, even more than $4 billion, with growth of over 20%.
Даже больше, чем $4 миллиарда, с ростом более 20%.
This is probably the biggest increase in turnover we have had with any country. We are also seeing investment contracts being signed. Chinese companies have begun actively investing in Azerbaijan, something that had not happened before. There have been individual investment projects, but we have never seen them on such a large scale or so coordinated with government agencies.
President Aliyev says these projects were the result of a deliberate strategic choice by Azerbaijan to partner with China in both green energy and green mobility.
Начинается строительство электростанций, солнечных и ветровых.
The construction of a solar panel factory has begun, and so has the assembly of electric buses.
Началось строительство завода по производству.
In this case, I must say that this was a strategic decision by the Azerbaijani side.
Сборка электробусов. И в данном случае должен сказать, что
Because when we decided to develop not only green energy, but also green transport, we had to choose a strategic partner, and the choice fell on Chinese companies. This choice was made, in part, as a result of the agreements I have already mentioned. And of course, the professionalism, quality, and speed of execution of these projects have confirmed the correctness of this choice.
быстрота исполнения проектов подтверждали правильность этого выбора, поэтому
Therefore, we purchased the green buses we see in Baku, some of them. Assembly will begin this year, with increased localization in the future.
начинается уже сборка и в дальнейшем с увеличением локализации.
President Aliyev added that alternative rail links, including through the Zangezur corridor, would strengthen Azerbaijan's position as a transport hub, despite having no direct access to the open ocean.
Китайская Народная Республика сейчас финансирует.
The People's Republic of China is currently funding the construction of another railway to the Caspian Sea via Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, investing billions.
Миллиардные инвестиции.
The terrain there is extremely complex, requiring the construction of a multitude of tunnels and bridges.
Говорит о том, что раз уж они приняли решение финансировать.
This very fact suggests that since they have decided to finance this project, the railway will not stand idle. Freight traffic to the Caspian Sea and therefore to Azerbaijan will increase.
И наряду со странами Центральной Азии.
Along with Central Asian countries, additional freight from China will naturally increase the demand for the east-west route, the Middle Corridor. Of course, we expect cargo from China and Central Asian countries to travel along the Zangezur corridor as well.
Естественно, мы рассчитываем, что грузы из Китая.
We naturally view it primarily as a link with the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, but also as an international transport corridor. Currently, there is only one railway route from Azerbaijan westward. There will be two.
Будет два. Два всегда лучше, чем один.
Two are always better than one, especially when you have no access to the world ocean and have to go through neighboring countries.
Через сопредельные страны.
It is always better to have an alternative for volumes,
Объема.
to be competitive, to prevent monopolization of the transit route by anyone,
Транзитного маршрута кем-либо. И для того, чтобы.
and of course, to ensure more competitive tariffs.
Конкурентоспособные тарифные условия.
The President also confirmed the emergence of a new area of cooperation within the political framework of the partnership, military technical collaboration, describing it as a strategic decision with long-term potential. President Aliyev says the breadth of cooperation with China reflects Azerbaijan's broader objective to act as a facilitator of regional connectivity, investing in infrastructure, diversifying partnerships, and positioning itself as a reliable hub linking Asia, the Caspian region, and beyond.
Turning to Kazakhstan, and the country plans to complete a large fibre optic cable to Azerbaijan by the end of 2026. It hopes it will boost internet traffic and improve data routes between Europe and Asia. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimazina has more from Almaty.
Kazakhstan plans to complete the fiber optic cable across the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan by the end of 2026. The project was announced at a government meeting by Kazakhstan's Minister of Digital Development, Innovation and Aerospace Industry, Jaslan Madiev. He said work is already underway on an optical communications line that will be laid along the seabed, linking the two countries across the Caspian. The cable is expected to increase the amount of international internet traffic passing through Kazakhstan and make data routes between Europe and Asia more reliable. Work on the project began in August 2025. Kazakhstan's national telecom operator Kazakhtelecom and Azerbaijan's Azertelecom carried out marine survey operations to assess the route ahead of construction. The fiber optic line will stretch for about 380 kilometers, running between the Kazakh port city of Aktau and the Azerbaijani city of Sumgait. And once completed, it will become the first subsea optical cable in the Caspian Sea. Kazakhtelecom says the line will support data transmission speeds of up to 400 terabits per second. The project is also part of the Trans-Caspian Digital Corridor, which aims to diversify and strengthen digital connectivity across the region. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Turkey is drafting legislation that would prohibit children under the age of 15 from using social media platforms. The move forms part of a broader bill and mirrors similar measures introduced by Australia last year. Under the proposed legislation, social media companies would be required to implement effective filtering systems to prevent minors from being exposed to harmful content. The bill is expected to be sent to the relevant parliamentary committee by the end of January. Orthodox Christians are celebrating Christmas in Baku and worldwide in the month of January. In Azerbaijan, believers gathered at churches for services marking the birth of Jesus Christ. Here's more.
We're in Baku at the Church of Mikhail the Archangel, where believers have gathered following overnight services marking the birth of Jesus Christ. Unlike much of the Western world, Orthodox churches follow the Julian calendar, which places Christmas on the 7th of January.
The celebrations began on January 6th, known as Holy Evening. For many worshippers, it also marks the end of a 40-day period of fasting and spiritual preparation. Today, they attend services, pray, and go to confession.
It would be wrong to say that worshippers come during Christmas or on other holy days with specific questions or particular concerns, because each time people bring something personal, something that weighs on them. As the Lord said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest, and I will soothe you." In this sense, the celebration of Christmas is no exception.
For many parishioners, the holiday is not just a date on the calendar, but a time of personal reflection and hope. It is a chance to pause from daily life and connect with faith and community.
Christmas is about love, light, and hope. It's a radiance in the heart. It is the hope that, no matter what happens in the world, the Lord is with us and will help us. Despite everything happening in the world, it is a light in the soul's eyes. Even if we cannot see it, we can feel it.
For the Orthodox community, Christmas marks the start of a 12-day religious period that ends with Epiphany, the feast marking the baptism of Jesus Christ. Across the country, Orthodox churches remain open to worshippers, marking the holiday with prayer, services, and family gatherings. Sabina Bobikirova, A News.
You're now up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and make sure you stay tuned to A News.